Hello.
Hello,
What's your name?
my name is Simon Borg Olivier.
Good, and lovely to have you here, Simon. And what's your practice been over the years?
I practice various types of posture, movement, breathing and mindfulness that I've learned from many amazing teachers over the last 55 years who came from a lot of the different traditional cultures around the world, like South Africa, Japan, Tibet, China, India, in the indigenous cultures of Australia. And I tried to bring them together with my understanding as a molecular biologist, a physiotherapist, and the studies I did at university. And all of that, to me, is what I practice.
And so one of my questions also would be like, how long have you been practicing? And you said 55 years.
Yes.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I started when I was 6, when my father, who was a free diver, who learned, free diving techniques, probably going back to Indian yogis according to the mythology of free diving. And he taught me how to hold my breath in to swim underwater because I was a bit heavy in my bones and I'd sink when I swam. So he said, if you're going to sink, I'll show you how not to breathe. And he taught me how not to breathe so I could swim a lap of an Olympic pool underwater before I could swim on top.
So when was the moment then that you took the practice for yourself? You said, I'm going to do this now.
Probably in my teens, I took that practice on board as being the funnest thing I could do by myself. And my parents were very lovely and they made a swimming pool for us when we moved to Australia. So all my teen years were spent in my leisure time underwater. And I would do various postures underwater. And then when I wasn't underwater, I'd go into the Australian bush, the forest in Australia, and I'd pretend I was underwater and I'd crawl through the trees and crawl through the bush in a way which was akin to what the Aboriginal people of Australia used to do. They'd usually walk naked through the forest, so I took off all my clothes and I'd walk naked as well because I figured if you wore clothes, you'd hurt the trees. But if you didn't wear clothes, the trees would hurt you, so you have to weave between them. And I developed this really fun type of animal movement in the forest when I was a teenager, and it became a really important practice for me.
What was the important thing for you about it?
The realization that happiness is a choice and that basically you don't wait to get happy. You can make yourself happy whenever you want. And it's easiest to be happy when your body is pain-free and functional and you have lots of energy and you're relaxed. So I recognized that and tried to find ways of doing that. It was something my mother taught me when I was very young, that happiness is a choice, not something you wait for.
And is that what compelled you to keep going, to keep practicing what you learned from your father and also to go and study yoga more comprehensively?
Yeah, it was something that felt good while I was doing it. There was no sense of having to achieve anything. It was something which I was enjoying while I was doing it. So it was a way to pass time such that I enjoyed it while I was doing it, and afterwards there was positive effects. And it gave me energy. So it wasn't like a workout, because I tried workouts over the years, and workouts were sort of adrenaline pumping and sort of exhilarating, but always I'd be exhausted afterwards. Whereas the practice I developed from myself and what I honed from the great teachers, who I can't thank enough, was what I call a work-in, where at the end of it I had more energy, less need for food and sleep, and that was something which kept drawing me back because it was my infinite reservoir of energy that I could always come back to. I think that's what kept me going. Still keeps me going.
Still so it's the same thing now that keeps you going from when you began?
It keeps me going like this even more now because as I got older, I'm 63 in a couple of weeks' time, and so what I found, especially over the last 25, 30 years, is that I don't heal as easily as I used to as a teenager. And so you need to, as you get older, nourish your immune system, reproductive system, digestive system, so that you recover faster, you heal faster. And so this practice that I engage in every day is one which actually minimizes my need for sleep and encourages my healing and regeneration. I feel like I'm regenerating by doing this. That's what's important, because as you get older, you want to minimize the effects of age. And so I feel like it's a regenerative practice.
So you feel like through the years it's really helped you to stay energized, stay vital.
Energized and feel young. You know, I go to dance parties 2 or 3 times a week, and I dance with people who are 40 years younger than me, and I keep it gentle and calm, and most of the time I'm doing my own gentle practice. But every once in a while I'm happy to just jump around and spin on my head and do outrageous things like the young kids do, because I feel young.
How has the practice helped you find stillness?
Stillness is sometimes misunderstood. I think of stillness as engagement. And engagement is, to me, being connected to an activity in the present moment. So it might look to someone else like you're doing lots of things, but usually the lots of things form one activity. And if you see it as one activity instead of lots of things, and you engage in it in the here and now, that's stillness, because the present moment is a still point. And connected to the activity, then there's joining, and joining is oneness, and then it's still.
And so when you actually relate stillness, a sense of stillness, and the practice, the contemplative practice that can bring you stillness, how do you deeply relate to that in yourself?
In myself. I think of stillness in the same way I think of infinity. My passion was mathematics for a long time. So when you look at mathematics, you have infinity, and infinity goes in both directions, and it's endless. And that's, when you think about traveling to infinity, you're totally in movement. But when you're traveling away from both sides of infinity to one tiny point in the middle, that tiny point in the middle could be also stillness. But as you come closer and closer to that point, there is no such thing as one single point. I mean, as you get smaller and smaller, half of a half is a half of a half of a half of a half. You can keep going half of a half. So there is an infinity in stillness as well. So in stillness there is movement, and in movement there is stillness. And so it's one, really. It's like the synthesis between duality and non-duality. And what I recognize more and more as I practice, and something which I realized when I was very young, is the most important thing, that we're all connected, that everything is connected. And that total connection is the same connection that what a mother has to a child. She recognizes that the baby that comes out of her is actually part of herself. And so the only thing that I can see really connects us is love, the same way a mother loves her child. So I think of our individual consciousness being one with the universal consciousness, and that oneness is the connection of love. It's all about love.
Is that what you think the biggest discovery for you has been?
It's been the ultimate discovery of life. It's all about love.
As you continue practicing over the years, what did you notice the changes were?
The biggest change, I think, was this realization that I'd really like to be living in my 20-year-old body, but not so happy about living in my 20-year-old brain. So I'm really happy with the wisdom and the revelations that I've got with the years that I've had. But I do notice the effects on the body. And at one point I thought maybe I'd live forever. But now I can see that, we're all here for a limited time. But it's just such a joy to exist. I feel like we're so lucky to have a body to live in. Mm. When I was younger, I used to try and go for out-of-body states. And I used to sit in meditative stillness and try and leave my body. And a few times I succeeded. But one time I sat and I was about to leave my body, and there was this message saying, "Where are you going? The house is a mess. Get in here, look after the body." And I realized, why am I trying to get out of it? When actually I'm really lucky, I've got a body, I should be getting into it. And that was a big revelation. Get into your body. Really acknowledge that we're really lucky to have this avatar that we can play with and really enjoy. And maybe we are eventually going to go back to some universal consciousness, spirit existence. But until that happens, I'm really happy to be living in a body, and I hope I can keep living in it for as long as possible. And it's really fun.
What have you found to be the biggest challenge you've faced in practice or in life and you've used your practice for?
I think the most important thing is to establish loving connection, first within yourself and then with the people around you and the world around you. So where there's blockage in that, that's the biggest challenge, because it's the most important thing to me. So if I have relationships with people where there's discontinuity, where there's lack of connection, that to me is a challenge. And I'll always try and reconcile relationships with friends, with ex-partners, with work colleagues. And that's the thing that is the challenge that I always will try and circumvent. Some challenges, it's like, it doesn't really matter whether you get them or not. But where there's blockage in relationship, that's important to reconcile. And sometimes we have blockages inside ourselves, which often manifest as sickness or injury. So what I try and do is I try and create loving connections inside my body. In fact, most of my practice is geared towards encouraging the circulation of what I call good energy and loving information inside my body, which physically inside my body is the good energy is enhanced blood circulation, and the loving information is a dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system, which really helps healing any injury, which usually manifests as, which is usually a manifestation of blockage. Any sickness is a manifestation of blockage. So I encourage good energy and loving information to flow inside myself, and that's then the model I use to be in the world. And then if I use that in the world, then it usually unblocks the blockages of lack of connection with other people. Share good energy and loving information in the world, and usually the world responds in a good way.
Exactly. So it is all really just about love.
It's all about love. It really is all about love. It really is. The funny thing is, people think they're all craving love, but we all think really that it's nice to get love, but actually giving love is much more important. And I always think about the idea that when you're a kid at school, sometimes there's that nerdy person who writes you love letters going, I really will love you, and you're going, who is this nerdy kid? You don't even feel their love, even though they love you so much. But sometimes you're that nerdy kid, and you love someone else, and you love them so much, but they ignore you, they don't even notice you, because they don't feel your love. You feel the giving of love. So actually it's more important to give love than it is to receive love, because you can feel giving love. You can't really feel receiving love as much. So I figure it's really good to give love to yourself, because not everyone likes getting your love. I got into a bus once some time ago and I smiled at the driver and they went, what are you looking at? And I went, So you have to be careful, especially in the modern world. You can't just come up and hug people. They might think you're a diseased person. So you have to pick who you're going to hug. So you have to pick who you give love to. But actually, if you give love to yourself, it sounds selfish, but it's a bit like I call airplane yoga. Get on the airplane and they say, put your own gas mask on first before you put it on someone else. So you have to look after yourself first. It's not being selfish, it's how you can function in the world. And then you get this added bonus. You start looking like a person who looks like they like to receive love. And then other people give you love because they feel safe to give their love to you. It's a win-win situation. Give love, and actually it comes back to you.
Beautiful, beautiful, thank you. So what, over the years, all these years, what have you learnt about yourself that you would like to share with others?
Wow. I think it's this thing of the resolution between what seems to be a dichotomy between the idea that we're all connected as one and we're all separate. This idea of, in yoga they talk about duality versus non-duality. I think we really are all connected as one universal consciousness, which is a non-dual state, they might say. And it's really good to always acknowledge that. But you can't live like that. You have to also acknowledge that there's individuals. Otherwise you might say, we are all connected as one, and in fact we're so connected, tonight I'm going to eat all the food, but because we're connected you're going to experience the food through my eating it. Actually, you have to acknowledge that people have separate existences and you have to share as well. So the realization that we have an ego, that we have a self, but we're also connected as others, and that both can exist at the same time. be connected with others, recognize you have an individual consciousness, and acknowledge that, look after that, but also acknowledge everyone else's existence is just as precious and just as important. That's probably the most important thing, I think, to recognize as an individual, if that makes sense.
Total sense. Thank you for your time, Simon.
It's such a pleasure to spend this time with you. Thank you very, very much.